Welcome to Psyche Talks.
Great to be diving in again.
Today we're getting into some really rich source material, digging deep to pull out those core insights for you.
Yes, and we've got excerpts from Carl Jung's own Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It's quite something.
It really is.
A direct look into his early life, the experiences that really formed him, and where his big psychological ideas actually came from personally.
Exactly. So think of this less like a lecture and more like a journey. We're exploring the mind, the personal world, of someone who basically shaped modern psychology, looking at the experiences that laid the foundation for his theories.
Right. Our goal here is to trace those connections for you. How did this specific memory or that strange event feed into the concepts we know, like the collective unconscious or archetypes? We want you to see the person behind the big ideas.
Okay, let's start where he does, right back in childhood. One of the most striking things he shares is that early dream, maybe age 3 or 4.
Yeah, the one with the underground temple.
Yes. And the ritual phallus on a throne, he describes it feeling like a profound initiation.
Into the secrets of the earth, as he put it. He saw it, looking back, as this kind of primal encounter with the darkness, the unconscious roots of his later thinking.
It sets a fascinating tone, doesn't it? And he connects this idea of early symbolic knowing to other things, too, like that mannequin ritual.
Absolutely. That's such a key story. He sees some African natives performing a ritual, gets this image fixed in his mind, and then later as a child he starts doing this elaborate little ritual himself with a carved mannequin.
Without really knowing why he was doing it at the time.
Exactly. He acted it out first, instinctively. The meaning, the conscious understanding only came much, much later.
Yeah.
It really underscores his later idea that the psyche communicates through symbols and actions before we can necessarily process it intellectually.
And you see this kind of deep engagement, but also a strange sort of detachment in other memories he brings up. That amazing green sky after Krakatoa exploded in 1883.
Wow, yeah.
Seeing a huge comet. But then also these really raw encounters. Finding a drowned man after a flood, watching a pig being slaughtered.
Right, things that would horrify most kids, or adults even.
But he says they were just matters of interest to him, not sources of trauma, just reality.
That's incredibly telling, isn't it? It points to a particular kind of sensibility right from the start. An intensity, a willingness to look directly at the world, even the messy, difficult parts, without flinching in the conventional way.
It suggests a mind already drawn to the complexities, maybe the shadows.
Definitely. And this wasn't just about the external world. He felt this profound split inside himself.
The two personalities.
Number one and number two.
Number one was the ordinary schoolboy, doing homework, fitting in.
Right. The everyday persona.
But number two,
Yeah.
that was different. Connected to the past, somehow older, wiser, holding secrets.
He talks about the confusion it caused, feeling like he was living in two different centuries simultaneously, and that pressure to hide. Number two, to act his age, to just be number one for everyone else.
You can almost see the seeds of his later concepts right there, can't you? Persona, shadow, the self.
It's hard not to. That feeling of an inner multiplicity, of a hidden depth beneath the surface personality. It's clearly rooted in his own lived experience from a very young age. It highlights that internal complexity we all navigate, consciously or not.
So, with this foundation, the symbolic insight, the fascination with reality's edges, this inner duality, how did that shape his view of more conventional things, like, say, religion as he encountered it?
Well, it seems to have bred a certain skepticism, or at least a questioning of the surface level. He mentions struggling with the literal image of Lord Jesus in pictures. It didn't resonate.
Right.
But he found more meaning in praying to a God you couldn't easily picture, a God of whom it was impossible to form any correct conception.
He connects that to his own secrets, doesn't he? The idea that the truly important things are often hidden, not easily defined.
Exactly. It's a fascinating parallel. And it sort of mirrors his boredom with school subjects like mathematics, which felt abstract and disconnected from what he felt was real. He was drawn more to drawing battles, playing with fire things with a bit more raw energy, perhaps.
A pull towards the mysterious, the less contained. Which brings us to those really uncanny experiences he recounts. They seem pivotal.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. The story of the dining table.
Made of solid wall.
Splitting right down the middle with a sound like a gunshot, spontaneously.
And then, just 2 weeks later, the bread knife.
Shattering into multiple pieces inside a cupboard drawer.
These weren't just minor oddities for him, were they?
Not at all. He treated them with real intellectual seriousness. He took the broken knife to a cutler.
Who confirmed it couldn't have broken like that naturally? No flaw in the steel.
Right. So simple physics was out. And the timing to such improbable events so close together, that really struck him. It pushed him towards thinking about coincidence in a different way.
Maybe not just random chance.
Perhaps something more was at play. Forces or connections that operate outside our usual understanding of cause and effect. This is where the idea of, well, meaningful coincidence starts to germinate.
And this openness, this willingness to consider the unconventional, directly led him to explore spiritualism, right?
It did. He heard about some relatives doing table turning, consulting a medium, and he started wondering if those strange events in his house might be connected somehow.
He didn't just wonder, though. He jumped in.
He jumped right in, started attending seances regularly, but crucially, he wasn't looking to debunk or believe blindly. He approached it like a researcher.
Focused on the content.
Exactly. What was being communicated? What were the phenomena? He meticulously documented everything, the raps, the messages. This actually formed the basis of his doctoral thesis.
That's fascinating. He also noted something about experimental conditions, didn't he?
Yes, that trying to impose strict controls often seemed to hinder the phenomena, as if they had a kind of autonomy, a life of their own. And through observing the medium closely, he gained profound insights into how a number two personality, that hidden secondary self, could emerge and even take over.
Sadly, with tragic consequences for the medium herself.
Yes, her story ended in character disintegration and an early death, which deeply impacted Jung's understanding of the dangers involved in these psychic splits.
He calls this whole period the uncanny events, the spiritualism research, the one great experience which wiped out all my earlier philosophy. That sounds like a complete paradigm shift.
It absolutely was. He felt he'd encountered objective psychological facts, things happening out there, not just in here. Evidence that the psyche wasn't just some epiphenomenon of the brain, but had its own reality, its own agency.
A huge insight, but one he couldn't easily share.
No. He talks about hitting the brick wall of traditional views, the steel of people's prejudice. Even close friends reacted with fear or dismissal when he tried to discuss these things.
That isolation must have been difficult.
Immensely. He felt this stark contrast between the limited, conventional urban world and what he called the real world, the world of nature, mountains, rivers, animals, where maybe these deeper, stranger realities felt less out of place.
This intense inner life, the engagement with the uncanny, the resulting isolation, it seems like the perfect, if challenging, preparation for formally studying the mind. How did this background shape his entry into psychiatry and that fateful relationship with Freud?
Well, he started his psychiatric career at the Berkowitz Clinic. He described it almost like joining a monastery, immersing himself in the routine, studying the history of the field. But his core question was different from the start.
He wasn't just interested in classifying symptoms.
No, he wanted to understand what was actually happening inside the patient's mind. He found the standard labels, like dementia precox for schizophrenia, pretty useless. He said they meant nothing to him in terms of the subjective experience.
He was searching for the meaning behind the madness?
Precisely. He immediately started looking for the meaningful connections in a psychosis. He believed there was a pattern, a germ of meaning, even in the most bizarre delusions or hallucinations.
Like the examples he gives.
Yeah, the catatonic patient making repetitive shoemaking motions, which made sense once Jung learned he'd been rejected by a girl he loved who worked in a shoe factory. Or Babette S.
Ah, yes, Babette.
With her fantastic pronouncements, I am Socrates' deputy, the double polytechnic irreplaceable Lorelei. To Jung, this wasn't just nonsense. It was a rich, symbolic inner world demanding interpretation.
And this focus on meaning, on the unconscious, is what initially connected him so strongly with Freud.
Absolutely. There was huge mutual respect at first. Freud was the pioneer exploring the hidden depths. They famously traveled to the U.S. together in 1909, analyzing each other's dreams constantly.
But even then, Jung mentioned some friction, dreams Freud couldn't quite place.
Right. Jung was having dreams with what he called collective contents images, themes that didn't seem to come just from his personal life, things that felt older, more universal. And Freud, sticking to his model focused on personal history and repressed sexuality, struggled to make sense of them in the same way.
So the seeds of divergence were there, but what was the actual breaking point, according to Jung, the moment it became clear they were on different paths?
He pinpoints a very specific, quite dramatic moment during a dream analysis session. Jung was pushing Freud on certain associations in Freud's own dream, sensing some resistance.
And Freud's reaction?
Freud apparently said, quite bluntly, but I cannot risk my authority.
Mm.
Jung said that sentence just burned into his mind. For him, it was a fundamental betrayal. Freud, in his eyes, was choosing personal standing, the authority of his theories, over the unbiased pursuit of truth.
That's a major schism right there. Truth versus authority.
A fundamental one for Jung. And it crystallized other growing differences. Jung felt his own approach was becoming more historical, looking at myths, symbols across time, while Freud seemed more focused on recent, individual materialistic factors, sex, power.
He mentions a key dream of his own around this time, too, the one about the house.
Yes, the house dream was hugely significant. He dreams he's exploring a house. The upper floor is modern, familiar. The ground floor feels older, maybe medieval. Then he finds stairs down to a Roman cellar.
And deeper still?
Deeper still, down into a prehistoric cave, littered with bones and pottery shards.
What did he take from that?
For Jung, this was a revelation. It wasn't just his personal unconscious. The psyche itself had layers reflecting human history. That deepest level, the cave, felt altogether impersonal. It was his first real grasp of an inherited psychic structure common to all humans.
The foundation for the collective unconscious.
Exactly. The idea that we're born with these innate patterns, these archetypes, shaped by millennia of human experience. So the split from Freud became inevitable. They had fundamentally different views on dreams.
Freud seeing them as disguised wish fulfillment, Jung as natural psychic expression.
Right, and different views on libido, Freud's sexual energy versus Jung's broader psychic energy. And, crucially, Jung's openness to paranormal phenomena, which Freud tended to pathologize or explain away.
That comment Freud made about Babette S., calling her phenomenally ugly.
Yeah, it really highlights the difference. Jung was fascinated by the richness of her inner symbolic world, while Freud's remark seems almost dismissive, focused on the superficial. They were just operating from different vantage points.
So the break happens around 1913. Jung describes feeling utterly lost, suspended in midair, without Freud's framework. A period of inner uncertainty. How did he cope?
It sounds terrifying, honestly. But his response was remarkable. Clinically, he threw out the rule book. He decided to approach his patients with no theoretical assumptions, just asking them, what occurs to you in connection with that?
Letting the patient's own material lead the way.
Completely. Letting their dreams, their fantasies, their associations dictate the interpretation. But the really critical part is that he was doing this to himself at the same time.
A parallel process, his own deep dive.
Exactly. He calls it his voluntary confrontation with the unconscious. He deliberately allowed himself to sink into the images, the fantasies, the powerful emotions rising up from within. He describes it as letting himself plummet down.
That sounds incredibly risky.
He acknowledges the fear of losing control, of being overwhelmed. He says the material felt like the stuff of psychosis. It took immense courage to face it directly.
And this inner turmoil seemed to spill out sometimes, didn't it? Those experiences in his house.
Yes, the feeling of the house being haunted.
Oh.
Not just a feeling, but something palpable. He says his children experienced it too. His son had this vivid, disturbing dream of fishermen and angels and devils. And the doorbell.
Ringing frantically by itself when no one was there.
These weren't just psychological metaphors for him. They felt like real, externalized manifestations of the intense psychic energy being stirred up. The boundary between inner and outer seemed permeable.
He connects all this directly to writing the Septem Sermones ad Mortuos, the 7 Sermons to the Dead, right?
He does. He felt this intense, almost unbearable pressure to write them down. And as he did, he says, the spooky atmosphere in the house just dissipated.
How did he interpret that? The ghosts, the writing?
He saw the haunting as a sign of loss of soul, meaning his conscious focus had withdrawn so deeply into the unconscious, into what he called the mythic land of the dead, that it animated these ancestral fragments, these collective contents. The dead, these psychic figures, were demanding attention. Writing the sermons gave them voice.
So these conversations with the dead were really conversations with deep parts of the collective psyche.
That's how he came to understand it. It was a terrifying but ultimately clarifying encounter with the structure and dynamics of the unconscious itself. A kind of initiation again.
He also realized these powerful images weren't just about him personally.
Right. He felt they concerned many others also, that he no longer belonged just to himself, but his life and experiences were somehow connected to the generality, to something universal.
A huge responsibility.
Immense. He knew the knowledge he was uncovering wasn't available in science yet. He had to live through the original experience himself, endure it, and then figure out how to translate it, how to plant it back into the soil of reality so others could understand.
Planting it in reality. That sounds crucial after such an intense dive. Did he consciously work on grounding himself?
Oh, absolutely. He explicitly talks about needing firm ground underfoot. He saw the danger. He mentions Nietzsche as someone brilliant who perhaps got lost because he didn't have that anchor. The fantasy needed a strong counterweight in everyday life.
And what provided that counterweight for him?
He's very specific and quite touching about it. His family, his wife and 5 children, and his professional work as a doctor were most essential. They kept him connected to ordinary reality.
He even lists the facts he'd hold on to.
Yes, like a mantra. I have a medical diploma from a Swiss university. I must help my patients. I have a wife and 5 children. I live at 228 Seestrasse in Kuzmacht. These weren't just biographical details. They were his lifelines, proof that he existed solidly in the here and now, preventing him from being swept away.
Alongside that personal grounding, he also sought external validation for his inner discoveries, didn't he? Looking for historical context.
That became the next crucial step. He needed to see if these strange, powerful inner experiences were unique to him or if they echoed through history. So he dove into studying Gnostic texts, mythology for various cultures, anthropology, looking for parallels.
Trying to map the territory he'd explored.
Exactly. And the breakthrough, the thing that really provided the framework he needed, was his encounter with alchemy.
Alchemy.
Yeah.
Turning lead into gold. How did that connect?
Well, he realized the alchemists weren't just talking about chemistry, or at least not only chemistry. They're bizarre symbols, they're complex processes, the negredo, the albedo, the rubedo. He saw them as metaphors for a deep psychological transformation.
A transformation of the psyche.
Yes, a process of confronting the shadow, negredo, the blackening, purifying it, albedo, the whitening, and integrating it into a new state of wholeness, rubedo, the reddening. It gave him a historical language, a symbolic system, that resonated profoundly with what he was seeing in himself and his patients. It validated his work as part of a long, albeit hidden human tradition of inner exploration.
So alchemy provided the historical basis he was looking for. And integrating all this, the personal experiences, the clinical work, the historical research, that's what flowed into his major published works.
That's right. It took years, decades even, to distill that intense prima materia. But it led directly to seminal books like Psychological Types.
Which came from trying to understand his differences with Freud and Adler, right? Realizing people perceive and judge the world differently based on their type.
Exactly, and developing his refined theory of libido, not just as sexual energy, but as general psychic energy. His work on the roots of consciousness, exploring the archetypes, and investigating synchronicity.
Those meaningful coincidences he'd been pondering since the table and the knife incidents.
Yes, trying to understand those causal connections. And his later life continued to be marked by experiences that reinforced these core themes.
Like his trip to Africa.
Yes, he describes finding a profound sense of peace there, feeling he'd escaped the demons of European consciousness. He loved the connection to nature, the palavers with the local people, feeling they lived closer to the earth, perhaps closer to the unconscious.
And he recounts other powerful, non-ordinary experiences later, too.
Definitely. That striking vision of his dying doctor, Dr. H, appearing not as himself but in his primal form, which Jung felt was a premonition, and his famous near-death experience in 1944.
Where he felt he left his body, experienced incredible bliss, and didn't want to come back.
Right, resisting returning to what he called the box system of ordinary life. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of the ongoing reality of the psyche for him, confirming the existence of dimensions beyond the everyday.
So looking back across his whole life, as he presents it in these reflections, it really seems like that intense period of fantasy and dream exploration after the Freud break, from about 1912 onwards, was the absolute bedrock.
It truly was the prima materia, the raw material for everything that followed. His entire life's work was about taking that fiery stream of lava from the unconscious and figuring out how to shape it, understand it, and integrate it into our contemporary picture of the world.
And he saw a real responsibility that came with accessing that material.
A profound one. He believed the images and insights emerging from the unconscious weren't just interesting phenomena. They placed an ethical obligation on the individual. You had to understand them, yes, but also integrate them, live them out responsibly. He warned against being inflated by the power they could unleash or getting lost in fragmentation if you couldn't hold the tension.
It's telling that during this intense period, he actually stepped away from his university lecturing position for a while.
Yes, he felt he couldn't honestly teach conventional psychology when his own mind was wrestling with such profound, unconventional material. He said his intellectual situation was a mass of doubts. He needed to find his own orientation before he could speak publicly about what truly preoccupied him. It shows how deeply personal this whole process was.
He describes parting from Freud as a necessary step into darkness.
Into the complete unknown. But interestingly, he also frames the incredibly difficult experiences that followed, that confrontation with the unconscious, as feeling like an act of grace in retrospect. It was terrifying, disorienting, but ultimately it was the source of his greatest insights.
It took him, what, decades to fully process and articulate that primal stuff into his published work?
Yes, a lifetime, really. Finding the language, the concepts, the historical parallels to make sense of it all and share it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Jung's own reflections, maybe a final thought to leave with you, the listener, comes from Jung himself. He saw our fundamental task as humans of becoming conscious of what presses up from the unconscious to kindle a light, as he put it, in the darkness of mere being.
That's a powerful challenge.
It is. What might it mean for you today to engage more consciously with your own unconscious through dreams, symbols, intuitions, and what responsibilities might come with that kind of deeper self-knowledge?
Jung certainly believed that this inner work wasn't just personal navel-gazing. He felt the psyche behaves objectively, connecting us across time and cultures. But profound knowledge, the kind that really shifts things, perhaps only becomes truly available when consciousness, individual and collective, is ripe for it.
Well, this exploration of Jung's memories, dreams, reflections has certainly shown us the intensely personal, often terrifying, yet ultimately incredibly fruitful journey behind his revolutionary ideas. From childhood intimations to facing the vastness of the collective unconscious.
A truly remarkable journey into the psyche.
Thank you for your support and for listening.